Sandra Bullock stepped out of her car in front of the glass doors of a well-known luxury real estate agency. The morning sun reflected on the wide windows, and people in expensive suits walked in and out with folders in their hands. Sandra wore simple clothes that day: jeans, a soft sweater, and comfortable shoes. She did not want attention. She wanted to blend in, to look like an ordinary woman looking for a house. Fame often followed her everywhere she went, but today she hoped to be treated like anyone else. She wanted to see a certain house she had read about in a listing. The house had charm, history, and personal meaning for her. It was not just about luxury. It was about finding a place where she could breathe, think, and maybe build new memories. When Sandra walked inside, the reception area smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers. The walls were decorated with large photos of mansions, villas, and high-rise apartments. The receptionist gave her a quick smile and asked her to wait for an available agent. Sandra sat quietly on a leather chair, looking around. People moved with confidence, dressed in designer clothes, carrying expensive watches and handbags. She noticed how staff treated these clients with wide smiles, open gestures, and eager voices. She wondered if her plain look would change how they treated her. After a few minutes, a woman in a sharp black suit approached. Her name tag showed she was a senior agent. Her steps were quick, her eyes calculating. She glanced at Sandra from head to toe, and her smile was thin. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked in a voice that carried more impatience than warmth. Sandra stood up politely. "I would like to see the Willowbrook estate," she said softly. The agent raised her brows. "The Willowbrook estate?" She let out a small laugh. "That property is not cheap. It is one of our most exclusive listings." Sandra nodded gently. "Yes, I know. I would just like to tour it." The agent crossed her arms. Her eyes narrowed as if Sandra's request was almost amusing. "Ma'am, are you aware that the Willowbrook estate is priced in the multi-million range? Usually, we only show that property to serious buyers." Sandra felt the sting of the words, but she stayed calm. "I understand," she replied. "I would still like to look at it." The agent leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't want to waste your time or mine. There are smaller homes in nearby neighborhoods that may be more suitable for your budget. Perhaps we should focus there." Her smile was forced, almost mocking. Sandra's heart sank, but her face remained steady. She thought of how often people judged others by clothes, by cars, by appearances. Here she was, standing in front of someone who had already decided her worth within seconds. She could have revealed her name. She could have said she was Sandra Bullock, an actress with enough success to buy the whole building. But she chose not to. She wanted to see how far this would go. Other clients in the room noticed the exchange. A couple in elegant clothing glanced over, whispering softly. A young man in a business suit raised his brows, sensing the agent's tone. Sandra pretended not to notice the attention. She only wanted fairness, not pity. The agent sighed loudly and tapped her folder. "Tell me, why do you want to see that property? Do you have financing arranged? Do you know what the taxes and maintenance costs would be?" Her tone was sharp, filled with doubt. Sandra kept her composure. "I want to see it because it matters to me," she answered simply. The agent shook her head, letting out a little laugh that was more insulting than humorous. "Well, we usually don't give tours for casual curiosity. Unless you have proof of funds, there isn't much point." Sandra felt the humiliation spread through her chest like fire. She was not angry at the words alone, but at the arrogance behind them. The agent had no idea who she was. She had no idea that the woman standing in front of her had earned respect from millions of people around the world. Still, Sandra chose silence. She did not want to fight. She wanted to see how patience could be stronger than pride. Finally, after a pause, the agent waved her hand dismissively. Fine. I'll schedule a tour, but don't expect me to rearrange my whole day. Clients who are actually buying get priority. Sandra nodded politely. Thank you, she said. Her voice was calm, even though her heart felt heavy. She walked toward the door, ignoring the glances from others. Outside, she took a deep breath. The cool air felt like freedom compared to the heavy judgment inside. She knew she had been treated unfairly, but she also knew she had kept her dignity. She thought of the house she wanted to see, the Willowbrook estate, and reminded herself of why she started this journey. It was not about proving her wealth. It was about proving her patience, her strength, and her ability to rise above insult without lowering herself. As she walked back to her car, she wondered what the next day would bring. She had a feeling this story was not over. Sandra woke up the next morning with the memory of the previous day still heavy on her mind. She replayed the scene in her head, the way the agent had laughed, the way she had spoken with sharp words that cut like invisible knives. Sandra had experienced criticism in her career before, but there was something about being judged so quickly, so unfairly, that struck deep. She was not upset because someone doubted her money, she was upset because someone had doubted her dignity. That feeling was harder to let go of. Still, she reminded herself that staying calm had been the right choice. Losing her temper in that office would not have given her peace. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window in her quiet home. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sandra held the warm cup in her hands and thought about why the Willowbrook estate mattered so much to her. Long ago, before fame, before the cameras, she had driven by that property with her parents. They had called it the dream house. To Sandra, it represented more than money or glamour. It represented memories of family, of laughter, of simpler times. That was why she wanted to see it with her own eyes. She decided she would not let the agent's behavior stop her. She would return to the agency. She wanted to face them again, but on her own terms. She wanted to stand in front of them not as Sandra Bullock, the actress, but as a woman with quiet determination. Later that day, she dressed once again in simple clothes. A plain blouse, comfortable pants, nothing that shouted wealth or fame. She wanted to stay true to her decision. When she arrived at the agency, she felt all eyes turned to her. Some of the staff remembered her from the day before. Their whispers floated through the air like a soft hum, but she walked straight to the desk and asked for the same agent. The agent arrived, still in her sharp black suit, still carrying herself with superiority. Her painted smile barely covered her annoyance. "You again," she said, her voice heavy with impatience. "Didn't we already talk about this property?" Sandra nodded politely. "Yes. I just want to schedule a proper tour of the Willowbrook estate." The agent laughed softly, shaking her head. "You are persistent, I'll give you that. But persistence doesn't change numbers. That house is not for people who just want to look around. Do you have any idea how much time it takes to prepare a showing?" Sandra remained calm. "I do not want to waste your time. I am serious." The agent rolled her eyes. "Serious?" She tilted her head, studying Sandra as if she were a puzzle she could not understand. "Serious buyers don't come in here wearing outfits from a department store. Serious buyers don't hesitate to prove they can afford it. You're just curious. And frankly, I don't have time for curiosity today." Her words were sharp, each one meant to sting. People nearby pretended to look at papers or screens, but their ears were clearly listening. Sandra could feel the silent judgment in the room, not against her, but against the agent. Many of them knew what was happening was unfair, but no one stepped forward to stop it. Sandra took a slow breath. She remembered her promise to herself: do not lose dignity, do not fall into anger. "I am only asking for respect," she said gently. I want to see the house because it means something to me. The agent smirked. Respect has to be earned, darling. It's not given for free. That sentence struck Sandra more than any of the others. She could feel the agent's pride rising like a wall between them. Sandra's heart hurt not for herself, but for the way people like this agent treated strangers every day. How many others had been spoken to this way? How many dreams had been crushed because someone thought they could decide who was worthy and who was not? She stayed silent for a moment, and in that silence, the room grew heavier. Then she spoke again, her voice steady. You may not believe me now, but one day you will regret speaking to people this way. The agent let out a small laugh, shaking her head as if Sandra's words were amusing. We'll see about that, she replied coldly. She gathered her folder and turned away, leaving Sandra standing there, ignored. Sandra walked out once again, but this time she did not feel weak. She felt strong. She had faced humiliation, but she had not let it break her spirit. As she stepped into the sunlight, she felt the air fill her lungs with hope. She had been patient yesterday, and today she had been firm. Tomorrow, she thought, would bring something different. At home that evening, Sandra received a call from a close friend. It was Keanu Reeves. They had known each other for years, through films, through friendship, through trust. Keanu could always sense when something weighed on her heart. His voice was calm, gentle, and steady. You sound troubled, he said. Sandra smiled softly into the phone. It's nothing big. Just a little reminder of how people judge too quickly. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Tell me what happened. Sandra told him everything. The agent's arrogance, the laughter, the insults. She explained how much the Willowbrook estate meant to her, and how the agent had refused to treat her with respect. There was another pause. Then Keanu spoke, his voice firmer this time. You should not have to face that alone. Tomorrow, I'll go with you. Sandra's heart warmed at his words. Keanu was not the kind of man who liked to make scenes, but when it came to fairness, he always stood tall. His presence alone carried weight, not because of fame, but because of his character. She felt relief wash over her, knowing she would not face the next step by herself. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sandra thought about everything that had happened. She realized that patience had carried her this far, but sometimes patience needed a companion, someone strong, someone who could stand beside you when the world tried to push you down. She closed her eyes with peace in her heart, knowing that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the agent would see not only her, but also the man who had walked through life with quiet strength and unshakable respect. And tomorrow, the real lesson would begin. The next morning carried a different kind of energy. Sandra woke up earlier than usual, the sunlight streaming gently into her bedroom, as if the world itself was preparing her for what was to come. She moved quietly through her home, fixing a light breakfast, though her thoughts were far away. Today she would return to the real estate agency, but this time she would not be alone. The memory of Keanu's words from the night before gave her comfort. He had promised to come with her, and knowing that she had someone by her side, a friend who carried both kindness and quiet authority, made the day feel lighter. As the morning passed, Sandra dressed simply once again. She didn't want to change her original decision. She wasn't going to prove herself with expensive clothes or jewelry. She wanted the lesson to remain clear: people deserve respect regardless of appearance. A simple blouse, comfortable trousers, and soft shoes were enough. When Keanu arrived, he wore his usual calm expression and modest-style black jeans, a plain shirt, and his steady presence that needed no decoration. When Sandra opened the door for him, Keanu greeted her with a small smile. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, though inside she felt a wave of nervousness. "Yes, I'm ready." They drove together to the agency. The street seemed brighter, the air fresher. Sandra watched from the passenger seat, feeling a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. She knew Keanu's nature. He wasn't one to raise his voice or seek attention, but when something was unjust, he carried a quiet power that could shake any room. When they arrived, the agency looked as polished as ever, its tall glass doors shining in the sunlight. Sandra and Keanu walked inside side by side. The moment they stepped in, whispers began. Staff at the desks froze mid-sentence, and even clients who had been browsing brochures paused to look. Recognition spread quickly. People knew Keanu Reeves the moment they saw him, but it wasn't just fame that caught their attention, it was the respect that seemed to walk in with him. Sandra noticed how different the atmosphere became. Yesterday, she had been treated like an outsider, someone not worthy of time. Today, with Keanu by her side, the very same people stared with awe. She felt both sadness and irony at the sudden change. The receptionist stammered, "Gee, good morning. How can I help you?" Her voice was polite, even nervous. Keanu gave her a kind smile. "We're here to meet with the agent who handles the Willowbrook estate." His tone was calm but carried a weight that left no room for doubt. The receptionist nodded quickly and made a call. Within moments, the same agent from before appeared. She walked briskly at first, but when her eyes landed on Keanu, she slowed down. The confident smirk she wore yesterday disappeared. Her lips parted slightly in surprise, and for a brief second, she seemed at a loss for words. "Oh, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice suddenly sweet. "What an honor. I didn't know you would be visiting us today." She glanced at Sandra, and her cheeks flushed as recognition began to dawn. The woman she had mocked and dismissed was standing right beside one of the most admired actors in the world. Sandra stood quietly, watching her, not needing to say a word. Keanu looked at the agent, his eyes steady. "We're here to discuss the Willowbrook estate. My friend has already requested a tour." The agent's smile widened, though it was shaky. Of course, of course. I didn't realize," she trailed off, clearly embarrassed. "Please forgive any misunderstanding from before." Sandra tilted her head slightly. "There was no misunderstanding," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but the truth of her words hung in the air. The agent's eyes flickered nervously, and she forced another smile. Other staff members watched closely. Some exchanged glances, realizing the situation. A few of them remembered exactly how rudely Sandra had been treated, and now they were witnessing the shift of power. Clients in the office whispered among themselves, recognizing the faces before them. The agent cleared her throat. "I'll arrange everything right away. We can schedule the tour immediately, if that's convenient." Keanu nodded, but his eyes never left hers. "Before we go further, there's something I need to say." The agent froze, her smile faltering. Keanu continued, his tone firm yet calm. "Yesterday, my friend walked in here as any client would. She asked for something simple, respect. And she was denied that. Instead, she was mocked. That is not how any professional should treat people." The room went silent. Even the receptionist looked down at her desk, ashamed of the behavior that had been displayed. Keanu's voice softened, but it carried strength. "You don't know who walks through your doors. A person may wear simple clothes, but that doesn't mean they don't belong. Every client deserves dignity. Every human being deserves respect." Sandra stood quietly, feeling the truth of his words settle in the air. She had chosen not to defend herself yesterday, but hearing Keanu speak today gave her heart a sense of justice. The agent swallowed hard. "You're right, Mr. Reeves. I was wrong. I should not have judged so quickly. I sincerely apologize." Sandra met her eyes. For the first time, the agent looked less like a confident professional and more like a person caught in the weight of her own mistakes. Sandra's expression was calm, almost forgiving, but she didn't rush to ease the woman's discomfort. Keanu placed a gentle hand on Sandra's shoulder. "Shall we proceed?" he asked her, as if giving her the choice. Sandra nodded. "Yes, let's go." As they walked toward the door together, the atmosphere in the office was completely changed. The staff looked at them with a mixture of respect and regret, and even the clients seemed to carry a quiet admiration. Sandra knew this was only the beginning. The house she wanted to see still waited, but today's moment had already taught everyone in that office a lesson. She realized then that sometimes silence was powerful, but sometimes it took the right voice beside you to make others see the truth. With Keanu by her side, she felt not only respected but also uplifted. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Sandra took a deep breath. She knew the day had already shifted the story in her favor. The agent who once humiliated her had been humbled, and the world inside that office would not forget the moment Keanu Reeves walked in and quietly, firmly, turned the balance of power. When Sandra and Keanu left the reception area and followed the agent toward the private meeting room, the air inside the agency still felt heavy. Whispers and glances trailed behind them. Sandra walked calmly, her face composed, but inside her heart beat faster. She was not nervous anymore. What she felt now was a strange mix of strength and relief. For 2 days she had been patient, quiet, and forgiving, but now with Keanu beside her, the balance of power had shifted completely. The agent, who only yesterday had dismissed her with arrogant laughter, walked ahead with careful steps. Her shoulders were stiff, her face strained. Every movement seemed forced, as if she were carrying a weight she could not put down. She opened the door to the meeting room and gestured for Sandra and Keanu to step inside. "Please, have a seat," she said in a softer voice than before. Sandra sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his calm expression never breaking. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence filled the room like a quiet storm waiting to break. Finally, the agent cleared her throat. I want to apologize again for yesterday," she began. "I wasn't professional, and I realize that now. I should have treated you with the same respect I give to every client." Sandra looked at her steadily. "But you didn't," she said simply. Her voice was not sharp, not cruel, just honest. "You saw me and decided I wasn't worth your time. You didn't even try to hide it. You laughed. You mocked me. And you didn't even let me explain why the house mattered to me." The agent lowered her eyes. Shame flickered across her face, but she tried to recover. "I was wrong. I judged too quickly. I've been in this business a long time, and sometimes I forget that appearances don't tell the whole story." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but strong. "Appearances never tell the whole story. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. That's not just good business, it's basic humanity." The agent nodded quickly, her hands twisting together. "Yes, you're right. I realize that now." Sandra sat back in her chair. For years she had faced cameras, interviews, critics, and audiences. She had heard opinions from strangers who thought they knew her, but this was different. This was not about fame or criticism. This was about dignity. She wanted this agent to understand, not just for herself, but for every other person who might walk through those glass doors wearing simple clothes. "I didn't come here to show off," Sandra said softly. "I came because the Willowbrook estate has meaning to me. But even if I had been someone with no money, no fame, no status, I still deserved respect. Everyone does." The words hung in the room like sunlight cutting through clouds. The agent shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Keanu's eyes stayed on her, calm yet unyielding. "You're lucky my friend is patient," he said. "Many people would not have walked away so quietly yesterday. They would have shouted, they would have made a scene. But she chose grace. You should learn from that. The agent swallowed hard. Her pride seemed smaller now, her confidence cracked. For the first time, she looked less like the untouchable professional and more like an ordinary person caught in the weight of her own choices. Sandra could see the struggle in her eyes. She could see regret beginning to form, though it was tangled with embarrassment. She did not smile, did not rush to forgive. Some lessons needed time to settle. After a long silence, the agent finally asked, "Do you still want to see the estate?" Sandra nodded. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "But not because I need your approval. Because I choose to." The agent blinked, taken aback by the firmness in Sandra's tone. Keanu gave a small nod of support, as if to say Sandra had already won this moment. When they stood to leave the room, Sandra noticed how other staff members glanced at her with admiration. They had all seen what happened. They had witnessed the arrogance, the humiliation, and now the quiet strength with which she carried herself. The lesson was not just for the agent, it was for everyone in that building. As they walked toward the exit, the agent trailing behind, Sandra felt lighter. The humiliation she had carried like a shadow was fading. In its place was something stronger, the knowledge that she had faced injustice without lowering herself. She had spoken the truth, and she had done so with dignity. Outside, the sunlight poured warmly over the pavement. Keanu turned to her with a gentle smile. "You handled that with more grace than most people ever could." Sandra gave a small laugh. "Grace is easier when you have a friend standing beside you." He shook his head. "You didn't need me. You already had the strength. I just reminded them of it." She looked at him with gratitude, her heart warmed by his words. He was right. She had carried herself with dignity from the beginning. Keanu's presence had only made others see what they had ignored. As they walked toward the car, Sandra thought about how quickly the world judged by surface things: clothes, cars, appearances. She promised herself she would always remember this moment, not with bitterness, but with resolve. She would remember that dignity cannot be given or taken by others. It comes from within, and no insult can erase it. For the agent, the lesson had only just begun. For Sandra, the chapter was nearly closed. What remained now was not humiliation, but peace. She had faced arrogance and turned it into an unforgettable lesson, one that would echo in that office long after she and Keanu had gone. As they drove away, Sandra leaned back in her seat, watching the city pass by through the window. She felt the calm of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. And deep inside, she knew the story was not just about her, it was about everyone who had ever been judged too quickly, everyone who had been underestimated, everyone who had walked away in silence when they could have shouted. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that came from victory without pride. For now, that was enough. The following week, the story of Sandra's quiet strength and Keanu's calm defense began to ripple beyond the walls of the real estate office. It had not been told through tabloids or splashed across the headlines, it spread the way true stories often do, through whispers, conversations, and memories shared. Clients who had been in the office that day told their families. Staff members, ashamed yet moved, spoke about what they had witnessed. Even the agent herself carried the weight of her actions, her pride cracked by the realization of how wrong she had been. But for Sandra, life went on with a steady rhythm. She did not wake up each day thinking of revenge, nor did she hold on to bitterness. She believed in moving forward with dignity. She focused on her work, on her friends, and on her family. Still, every now and then, she thought about the Willowbrook estate. It called to her like a quiet voice from the past, reminding her of childhood drives with her parents and the dream they had once shared. One morning, she and Keanu decided to return to the estate not through the agency, but through a private arrangement. A different representative, one who had heard of the incident, reached out with genuine kindness and professionalism. They arranged a tour without arrogance, without judgment, and with the respect Sandra had deserved from the beginning. When they arrived at Willowbrook, the house stood tall and graceful, surrounded by gardens that whispered with the wind. The driveway curved like a welcoming arm, leading them toward the front doors. Sandra paused before stepping inside, her breath catching as memories filled her heart. She could almost see her younger self, sitting in the back seat of her parents' car, pointing at the estate and calling it the dream house. Keanu stood beside her, his presence steady as ever. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Sandra nodded, her eyes shining. "It is." They walked through the rooms, each one carrying the elegance of history and the promise of new memories. The sunlight poured through tall windows, falling across wooden floors polished with care. Chandeliers hung like jewels, though Sandra's eyes were not on the wealth but on the warmth the house seemed to carry. She touched the carved stair railing gently, feeling the craftsmanship, the stories hidden in the details. For her, this tour was not about money, not about proving anything to the agent who had once mocked her. It was about reclaiming the peace she had nearly lost in humiliation. It was about standing in the home that meant something to her heart, and knowing that she had reached this moment not by shouting, but by patience and grace. As they moved from room to room, Keanu noticed her silence. "You're thinking about your parents," he said quietly. Sandra smiled softly. "Yes. They loved this house, even though they never owned it. To them, it was always a symbol of possibility. To stand here now, after everything, feels like closing a circle." Keanu nodded. "Then maybe this house was always meant to find its way to you." Sandra's eyes grew misty, but she held back her tears. She didn't need to cry to honor the moment. She only needed to breathe it in, to feel the weight of the past and the lightness of the present. Later, as they left the estate, the representative thanked them warmly, promising to send details without pressure, without judgment. It was the kind of professionalism that should have been shown from the start. Sandra appreciated it deeply. Meanwhile, back at the agency, the agent who had humiliated her faced her own quiet storm. Word of her behavior had reached the senior management. Complaints had been noted, not only from Sandra's experience but also from others who now found courage to speak up. For years, she had hidden arrogance behind sales numbers and false smiles, but now the mask was slipping. She realized too late that respect and kindness were worth more than any commission. She replayed that day in her mind, the moment Sandra walked in with simple clothes and a calm smile. She remembered how quickly she had dismissed her, and how wrong she had been. Her regret grew heavier each day. She knew she could not erase the past, but she also knew she had to change if she wanted to regain her integrity. For Sandra, however, the matter was closed. She did not dwell on the agent's regret. She did not need to. Her dignity had already spoken louder than any apology could. She carried no grudge, only the lesson. Weeks later, Sandra and Keanu met again at a small cafe, sitting by the window where the sunlight spilled across their table. They spoke about life, about work, about dreams. And eventually, their conversation circled back to the estate. "Are you going to buy it?" Keanu asked gently, sipping his coffee. Sandra thought for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe. But whether I do or not, I already feel like I've gained something more important." "And what's that?" Keanu asked. She looked out the window at the world moving by, the people rushing, the cars passing, the everyday rhythm of life. The reminder that dignity is priceless. That patience, even when it feels heavy, always wins in the end. And that having a true friend beside you makes the weight easier to carry. Keanu smiled at her words, a smile filled with quiet pride. "That's a lesson worth more than any house." Sandra nodded. "Exactly." The two friends sat there in peaceful silence, knowing that what had begun as humiliation had ended as a story of strength, friendship, and grace. The world outside might have forgotten the incident in time, but those who had witnessed it would remember. They would remember how a simple woman in plain clothes stood tall against arrogance. They would remember how respect, once denied, returned stronger than ever. And they would remember how one man's quiet voice reminded everyone that kindness is never optional. For Sandra, the chapter closed not with anger, not with revenge, but with peace. She had walked through humiliation and come out with her head held high. She had faced judgment and turned it into a lesson. And as she looked at Keanu across the table, she realized something else. Sometimes life's greatest victories are not about winning arguments or proving wealth. Sometimes, the greatest victory is walking away with your dignity untouched, your heart steady, and your friendship stronger than ever. And that was exactly what she had done.